Okay, so we're going over system TES. We're going to be going over 1.2, but we're going to go over the introductions again. So system TES, Talmud Sefirot, part 1, Tzimtzum restriction and Kav line. The rules to understand Talmud Sefirot. I like to repeat this each time to give you sort of the direction we're going with this. This is based on the disclosing of portion covering 2 of Bala Sulam. So it's to remember that we want to go from unnecessary to necessary. So anything we read, the idea is to not look at it as something external, but to look at it as something internal. So not look at it as a spiritual reality in another dimension, attainable only by Kabbalists, but rather to make it necessary, which means internal, which is our perception of the reality we live in with our physical body in this world. Impossible is when we think it's talking about the past, states that happened in the past when the will to receive cascaded to our world. Whether it's right or not, that's not the issue. The issue is that we want to look at it as it being possible, which means it's talking about our future. States of perception we will go through on our path of spiritual advancement. And then secrets is when we think it's talking about others, that it's not talking about me, but someone or something else. And it's disclosed to you when you understand it's talking about you. It's talking about your ego. It's about me and how I perceive reality. The phases. So we have the root phase, which is thought of creation, which is called preparation, keter, crown. And this is when, before we're born, this is the preparation for us being born into the world. Then we enter phase 1, which is humanity, where we lived most of our lives. And this is where we do all the things that we have in humanity. We'll have families, go to work, deal with the country and all different things which are related to that. And at some point, and this of course is called Chokhmah, wisdom, and at some point, our point in the heart awakens and we feel disconnected and we feel something's wrong. And then we look or find ourselves in a spiritual society, which is phase 2, which is called Bina, understanding. This is when we find ourselves in a spiritual society, and the spiritual society talk to us about altruism without self-benefit. They tell us of how we need to change from wanting to receive. We need to want to bestow, since the Creator bestows, and we should bestow as well. But at some point, that's not good enough for us either. And we feel that it doesn't provide us the sustenance that we're still looking for. And that's when we join phase 3, the group, called Tiferet, beauty. The group is an interplay. The group phase is an interplay of receiving and bestowing. You're bestowing externally, like you were doing in phase 2, but now you're also working on your internal power, which is receiving that internal power. But at some point, even that is not good enough for you. And then you reach phase 4, which is the individual. This is when, it's called Malchut, kingdom. This is when a group setting is just not good enough for you. And what you start to do is you start to get individuals. They might be in the group, which are in the spiritual society, which are in humanity, but you have a conversation with them on an individual level and not in a group meeting setting. The idea is that there's no coercion here. So the idea is a person advances when he feels that he needs something extra. And these are the summary of the phases. So we've got the preparation, keter, crown, root phase, thought of creation, basically before we're born. Then you've got chokhmah, wisdom, phase 1, humanity, unformed. This is where we lived most of our lives and still do even afterwards, because their phases are added on top of each other. Then we reach Bina, which is understanding, phase 2, spiritual society, which is also called chaos. Then you've got the group, which is Tiferet, beauty, phase 3, group, darkness. And then finally, Malchut, kingdom, phase 4, individual, spirit. And this is going to go over the same things, but in a different way. So let's go over the first 5 again. So we've got reality. In reality, we have the preparation phase, which is the root phase. We have humanity, phase 1, which is basically the idea is it's built on hamshacha, which is attraction. The law of attraction, where we attract to ourselves things that we want and repel things that we don't want. But we can only deal with the things that we actually desire or not desire. Then you've got spiritual society, which is phase 2. This is also done by hamshacha, which is attraction. And the idea is that even though in this phase we work more on clothing, which we'll talk about in a moment, the idea is that in the development, it's still called Hamshachah, it's still called attraction. And then we've got group, which is phase 3, which works actively on Hamshachah and attraction. So phase 1 worked passively, phase 2 didn't want to do it, phase 3 decides to do it actively. But then it's intense in the individual phase, which is phase 4. And when you have that intense desire, that attraction, that's when the result of it is called hitlapshut, clothing, where your excessive egoism continues to be building, not because you're doing the clothing, but you're just doing so much attraction that it overflows. That's the idea, the kos shel bracha, the cup of blessing, where by filling the cup, it overflows outside of it. And that overflowing causes these 5 steps of root, unformed, chaos, darkness, and spirit, which cover the entire reality. So you're not trying to actively cover the entire reality. It's a result of you just being so intense internally. It overflows externally. When you've reached that maximum, which is called Daled and Daled, 4th phase and 4th phase, then you pass the barrier. This is called, the action is tzimtzum, restriction, but it's done for you again. So you're just focusing on the attraction, the hamshachah, and the result of it is your clothing. And the result, when you've reached the maximum clothing, is the restriction, that you go above the ego. And so you're entering emptiness, which is called halal, creation. And then you get your screen, which what the screen does is it lets the excessive egoism slowly come in through the screen into creation and converts that from filling into power. And that's why it's called inner light, or pnimi. Any questions so far?
As you say, when it overflows, the clothing is a result. It's not an action of what we do, but it's the result of our actions.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to be going over in 1.2. We're going to talk about this, the 4 phases of how we actually go through that. And you'll see why it's important when we go over the Talmud Sefirot part as well.
And then the first step that you have, the reality, that has nothing yet to do with perception. I mean, it's just physical still?
So yes. Yes, it's still, I would say like this. You know, if someone suddenly came into this group, they would see you in the group. So they would see you in that group, you could say, external phase. They could see you're here, right? Someone can see you're in a spiritual society or in humanity. The idea is that when we're talking about the clothing, that you already can't see. You can't see if someone's actually clothing or how much they're clothing of the environment around them. All right, so let's go to the presentation again. Chapter 1.2, reason for passing the barrier. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the difference between attraction and clothing. So attraction, which in Hebrew is called hamshachah, is also reception, Kabbalah, and vessel, which is kli. So these are all talking about the same thing of basically you having the vessel and it's pulling things into it. It's like every matter pulls, its mass pulls things towards it and can repel things as well. Then we've got clothing, hitlapshut, which is bestowal, called in Hebrew hashpa'ah, and it's the light, which is called or. So the idea is that with clothing, what you're doing is you're dealing with things which are outside the vessel, and you're trying to clothe out what's outside, not what's inside, but rather clothing what's outside, trying to grow your influence. That's why it's called influence. Your influence is not on yourself, your influence is on others which are outside your vessel. And you're trying to, and we'll see in the phases, we go through different calculations of how we're going to deal with this clothing concept. And just to give you a physical understanding of what clothing is, this is only a human thing. So we've got still, unformed, vegetative chaos, and animal darkness. They all have the quality of attraction. They can all receive things. The human, which is the spirit, is got clothing. It's got bestowal. What this means is that as humans, we don't just receive filling, but we care about the environment that filling is in. So for example, when we go to a restaurant, we don't just eat the food, but we care about how the restaurant looks, we care about the music, we care about the waiters, we care about the cutlery, we care about, does the restaurant, do they support things that we don't like them to support? And if they support things we don't like, we'll leave the restaurant. But that's got nothing to do with the food. So the food is what I'm going to receive, the attraction. But the environment, what's that got to do with the food? If you bring in to an animal, you bring in the most delicious food in its form, and doesn't even care about the form, he just cares about it being the food. He doesn't care where it is, he doesn't care what's the ideology of the managers of the place. All it cares about is the food. It only cares about the attraction itself. The humans care about the clothing as well. They care about the environment it is, how is it presented. This is a human element that animals and lower degrees don't have. And that's what we're trying to reach. We're trying to reach the combination of that attraction and that clothing to pass the barrier. So we have the interplay. So the interplay is that you've got the light, which is pleasure and power, and you've got the vessel, which is the desire. And the vessel cares about the attraction, the reception. But because we're humans, we also care about the clothing that goes around the pleasure. So we care about how it's clothed. How is that food or how is that pleasure clothed in us? This is we'll see this happen not just in the way we enjoy pleasure, but we'll see this about responsibility. So, for example, when a car hits a pedestrian, the pedestrian doesn't blame the car; it blames the driver. An animal, if hit by a car, doesn't blame the driver; he blames the car. He starts hitting the car because he thinks the car did the accident, not the driver. The reason is because the animals don't have that clothing counterpart, so they can't do that calculation. The human looks at the car, understands that the car is a still thing. It has no sort of desire of its own, rather it's controlled on. And then it looks, and sees the human behind the wheel and blames the human behind the wheel and blames the human, not the car. And that's because we have the ability to clothe things, to add responsibility. It's the same thing that allows us to feel to feel our country. Even though the person is not going into his desire, he doesn't feel the country in his desire. He's feeling the country in his clothing.
Zeka,
Yes.
what is the interplay of this clothing, or how does it relate to confidence, or what is sometimes referred to as the intention behind the act? What is this in the interplay?
The clothing is not the intention behind the act. The clothing is the environment what you want. Let's say, for example, you have a pleasure. Let's say you want to become the creator, right? Or let's say you want let's go for a physical thing. Let's say you want food, or you want to buy a car. You don't just care about the car itself. The car is the pleasure you want. The vessel, right? You've got a vessel for a car. And the light, that pleasure is the car that you want. But you don't just care about the car. You care about where did you buy the car? You care about, did anybody else buy the car? You care about so much environmental issues that have got nothing to do with the car itself. And maybe have no even direct effect on the car. What the managers of that car company believe in. Let's say, for example, they support terrorists or they're anti-Semitic or something like that. That's got nothing to do with the car. The car will be the same whether they're anti-Semitic or not. But you will have a totally different relation to the pleasure depending on how it's clothed, depending on what the managers think or what the company thinks or what their values are. The values of a company has got nothing to do with the product, right? But you'll still make a decision on whether you'll buy a smartphone or any kind of product depending on the environment that product is in.
Yeah, but you're describing still more egoistic calculations of why we want the car. So how does this relate to this other level of perception where we're talking now, you're giving us a corporeal example, but how does this relate to the spiritual?
So that's what we're going to go over now. We're going to go over now the developments of attraction and clothing. So you'll see, this is phase one, right? The development of attraction and clothing, phase one. So phase one, which is, in humanity, unformed, it deals with external attraction. And what that means is it can only clothe what it desires. That means, for example, if it wants a car, it can care about the clothing of that car, but it can't care about something that's got nothing to do with the car, indirectly or directly. You can only for example, if your desire is a car, you won't be dealing with the restaurant next to it. Right? So you're only clothing what you desire. The clothing serves the desire. The reason you care about the clothing is because you want the product. If you don't want the product anymore, you don't care about the clothing. So it only cares about the desire. And this is phase one, and that's what we're doing when we're in phase one. This is the idea when it says in Talmud Sefirot that in phase one, the light filled the kli. Right? There was a light that filled the kli. So what is that light that fills the kli? That means that the light fills the vessel, which means that the attraction you're doing is what you desire. And that's what phase one deals with. But it deals with external attraction. It only cares about what will satisfy its five senses. It doesn't care about its internal power. It's only caring about its external power. Phase two, this is when we enter the spiritual society, deals with external clothing. So what it says to you is, forget about your desire. Your desire is egoistic. What you should focus on is clothing, right? But it wants to clothe what it does not desire. So what it says is for you, it says, care about the friends that you're not in contact with. Care about the world kli. Care about the world. Care about the correction of the world. And you're like, well, what's that got to do with me? It's got nothing to do with you. That's precisely why we want you to care about it. We wanted you to care about things that you do not desire. They don't care about internal power. All they care about is altruism without self-benefit. So they care about just the clothing, and they don't care about the desire. Any questions on this? Go for it.
It says altruism without self-benefit in phase two. So when we move to the next phase, we're looking for altruism with benefit, self-benefit. I mean, are we still in that state of we're benefiting ourselves by internal power is what we're saying here, right? And so this is without internal power, because that's what it says, no internal power. So when you say self-benefit, you mean no internal power. That's really what we mean, right?
Exactly. So phase two cares about anything that's got nothing to do with you. So all it's going to care about is everything. It's going to care mostly about the society, and that's what their focus is going to be on. So we said that phase two wants to clothe only what it does not desire. It doesn't care about internal power, because internal power is, again, something you could desire. And it's all about trying to get you outside of yourself. That's what phase two is for. And the reason why this is needed is because this is a step of the development, because the next stage is phase three. Phase three desires internal power. It's already understanding that the reason it can't clothe is because it has no power to clothe with. It has no desire to clothe with. So but still it's going to have a limited clothing capability, because now it's got a fight between its clothing, wanting to clothe the entire world, which is what phase two gave it, to want to care about something more than itself. But it still can't finish that clothing, because it's got a fight between, I'm trying to increase my internal power, but what about this clothing? And it has conflict between internal, which is internal power, and external clothing, right? And that's phase three. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right on the mark for me.
Yep,
yeah.
perfect.
Wow.
Yes, Mark.
I've got a question on back. I hate to backtrack, but I didn't ask you earlier. On phase one, I understand the motivation. It's only the will to receive, and all you want is to fulfill your desires. But what powers phase two? What's the drive? What do you use for fuel in phase two?
So that's part of the problem with phase two, is that its fuel, it basically is leftovers of phase one. So depending on the fuel that it has in phase one, and remember, these are states on top of each other. So he continues to have fuel in phase one, right? But he has no fuel for phase two in itself, and that's why he fails to clothe. He tries to, and the energy he's using to try to clothe phase two, he's getting from phase one, right? But that's why you'll see lots of people, for example, when they're in phase two, if they don't take care of their phase one, then it deteriorates. Their family deteriorates, their job deteriorates. We all see this in the society. It's because they're focusing so much on phase two, they neglect phase one. But the whole idea is that they're states. So you have to keep phase one going even when you reach phase two. And you have to keep phase two going when you reach phase three. You need all the different phases active at once, because each one has an important part. Because phase two is going to tell you how to take into consideration things that you didn't before. None of us before the spiritual society thought about the world, thought about correction, thought about helping others in a global place, right? We might have helped our neighbor physically and stuff like that, but we wouldn't have thought of the world correction as a whole. We wouldn't have thought of the system. Phase 2 gives us the idea of a system, but we still can't clothe that system. But phase 3 already starts giving the solution like, oh, what you need is actually to, actually use your ego. So phase 2 says, don't use your ego, leave it outside. We should leave our egos. If only our egos would go smaller or die altogether, which would kill the person, of course. But the idea is that phase 2 doesn't want to receive. And that's the concept in TES where it talks about Bina, that it wants to bestow. It looks at the creator, it says the creator is a bestower. I want to bestow as well, but as a human. I don't want to become the creator. Phase 2 doesn't want to become the creator. Phase 2 wants to stay human and bestow as a human and be like equal in the qualities, but not as in a spiritual quality, but as a physical quality. If the creator bestows, I want to bestow in physicality. That's why it's called external clothing. Phase 3 already understands the goal of to become the creator, and therefore it starts working on its internal power. Why internal power? Well, because internal power is the creator within me. So if I want to grow the creator within me, I need to work on internal power. And that's why when you're working on the phase 3, which is the group, the discernments you're going to collect are going to be so different from the discernments you collected or you did collect when you were in phase 2. In phase 2, the discernments you collected was more of how do I deal with the society? How do I try and do what they want as much as possible? Phase 3, its focus shifts to how am I going to become the creator and work on this internal power. But it still has to keep that phase 2 external clothing active. It still has to be in the society. It still has to worry about how do I keep them, that struggle, that conflict of keeping the phase 2 I was in before and the phase 3. Phase 1 it already has no problem with. It understands that I still have to continue being human. It has a conflict between the spiritual society and the group. And this is part of the progression. It's natural. But the idea is to keep them both alive and understand how phase 2 is important, because at the end of the day, what internal power you're trying to use it for? You're trying to use it for that external clothing, right? You're not trying to just have internal power just for the sake of it. You're trying to buy the whole world. So you've got the goal, which is that, the world, the reality, which is the external clothing, and you've got the means, which is that internal attraction.
So we can't, the reason, okay, so I think this makes sense because the conflict in phase 3 between internal and external is because these phases are all layered on top of each other. So you pretty much explain that. But so we're basically moving back and forth between these layers at any particular point in time, correct?
Well, the idea is that when you reach that phase 3, now you've got to worry about 3 phases. You've got to worry about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Someone who has reached phase 3 doesn't have to worry about that.
Is our state changing as we move back and forth? Whatever we've acquired in state in phase 3, we shouldn't lose that if we got to go back to stage 2 or
you don't
phase
lose it.
1.
You don't lose it. The idea is to keep it alive. It's like, even if you're in phase 3 group, you still have to go to the toilet. You still have to eat. That's phase 1. So the phase 1 within you is dealing with all your corporeal issues, right? Having a job, having a family, eating, sleeping. All the human behavior is in phase 1. All right. Phase 2 deals with things which are above that. So phase 2 doesn't actually deal with making your finances better. They deal with world correction. They deal with, trying to give contentment to the creator. Right. So it's talking about, you've got 2 things you have to deal with now. You have to continue dealing with your normal life as you were doing before. Now you've got this other worry on top of it, which is what the spiritual society tells you, which tells you it's all about the quality of bestowal. You have to, and the quality of bestowal, that's that clothing, right? You have to clothe the world. You have to bestow to the world. That's why dissemination is such a strong thing in phase 2.
So we basically are in a state of constant check. We're checking our spiritual state all the time, right?
Exactly.
I mean, how do we take all this knowledge, these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and use it to our advantage to gain internal power so that we
so the idea is, first of all, to know about the things you're going to be going through, right? The idea is it's not about the knowledge itself. The knowledge allows you to understand the situations you're going to go through, and it's going to help you able to accept it easier. So, for example, a tendency for someone who joins phase 3 is to automatically think, oh, I don't need phase 2. Just like the tendency of phase 2 is to think it doesn't need phase 1. We've all seen people come to the society and think like, oh, so I don't need my job anymore. I'll leave my family. They haven't got a point in the heart. I've got to focus on this world dissemination thing, and to spend so much hours in the phase 2 society that the whole phase 1 deteriorates. And then after they come to phase 2, ask for help, but phase 2 is not designed for that. And then, of course, they have to go back and rebuild their phase 1. So the same thing is for phase 3. The idea is to keep phase 2 intact, because the first sort of response is to say, oh, now I found this is so much better, I'll leave phase 2. It's like, no, but phase 2 gives you all the questions. Phase 3 gives you the answers. Just like phase 2 gave you the answers for the questions you had in phase 1. So the idea is each degree gives you the answers of the previous degree's questions.
So people have done that in this society? They just leave their family and their job? Does that happen? You've seen that happen?
Yes, that has happened. There's been many divorces, and it's part of the process. So the idea is that the reason why we go over these processes is to allow you to go through them as quickly and smoothly as possible. It's like, could someone pass without these? Yes, they could, but they would have to sort of build this picture in their mind beforehand. And the idea of giving this out is to make it easier for people, so there's less casualties along the way.
Wow, so here's what I do. Like, I'm married and my wife is not into Kabbalah, so I just don't talk to her about it. I just keep moving forward, and it never comes up.
That's one way. For example, I do talk to my wife about it, but the idea is to find the balance. It's all about balance, right? So the idea is, we always have
Wow.
we all have to do balance, and by doing that balance, then we'll actually able to handle them all together.
Zach, I'm sensing that between one phase and the other phase, there's also the danger of plateauing, because you mentioned knowledge. Like, oh, we're in phase 3, where we feel so not in phase 2, but then I sense that it's a danger, because then that does not give me the strength. It leaves me in a comfortable, egoistic state that says, I need to get to phase 4. Or whatever it is.
That's good. But that's good. The problem is if you're happy with the knowledge without it wanting you to desire to reach phase 4. If you're in phase 2 and you read this knowledge about phase 2, you're like, oh, I got all the knowledge, everything's fine. Then that means you have no desire to actually become phase 4. So the plateauing is a given if you fall on the knowledge and don't use the knowledge as a means of advancement. So the reason of the knowledge is for advancement. It's not just to have the knowledge for the sake of it. At the end of the day, you have problems in your life you want to solve. And you're going to read, so if knowledge is all you need to solve your problems, then that's fine. But the idea is that for people who want to advance, the knowledge is not enough for them. They actually want to actually reach the internal power itself. They want to become the creator and then solve their problems. They want to look at it from two perspectives. They want to look at it from a perspective of a human being, and they want to look at their life from a perspective of the creator. And that's what you get when you pass the barrier. You get to be two. You get to look at it from the creator's perspective and from the human's perspective. And you could say that the idea, you could say, of the 4 phases before the barrier is to get you used to having to live these like double lives or triple lives or quadruple lives, to get you using the idea of handling states simultaneously. At the end of the day, they're not totally simultaneously, since, when you're in a phase 2 group, you're probably not dealing with your wife, which is phase 1. Or when you're in, you're probably not dealing with the spiritual society, or you will be, you'll be talking about questions and stuff. You're not having to deal with the spiritual society rules and regulations. So the idea is that they're not totally simultaneously, you're switching between them. But when you actually, become the creator, then you're actually simultaneously, at the same time, at all times, looking at it from the creator's perspective and from the creature's perspective.
Well, I just don't find it to be an easy thing. You mentioned you can give, it's easy for you to talk about this to anyone, because at the end of the day, it isn't going to take them unless they do the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The idea is that I'm not worried about showing all these phases, because if a person doesn't have an actual desire to pass them, the knowledge is useless. It'd be like showing someone, showing a person on the street how to do, surgery. But if he doesn't have a desire for it, then you're just showing him information that is just useless. It's unnecessary for him. He sees it as something external to him, not as something internal. right? If you show somebody, things about the Torah or the Talmud or things that look like they're talking about the past, even Talmud and Sefirot looks like it's talking about the past. At the beginning, right? When in the middle point, when it decided to do the restriction, and that's the way Talmud and Sefirot is taught. It's taught as something happening in the past. That means it's impossible because you can't reach the past. It's like learning about history. Just because you learn about the Egyptians doesn't mean you now can become an Egyptian. Right? You're just learning about the past. It's impossible to reach states of the past. The idea is when you learn about it, that it states of the future, then it's talking about you. It's talking about things you're going to go through. Then you look at Talmud and Sefirot in a totally different view. And then the final is when you understand that it's not talking about other people, the creatures, other people, it's the groups, the friends, it's the Rav or anything else. It's talking about you. You're going to pass through these phases. And that's what makes it from secrets to disclosed. And that's why I always am going to repeat these three rules, because it changes the whole way you relate to tasks. Because instead of relating tasks as some knowledge, that by the result of that knowledge, some light will come and reform you, this is actually talking about your phases. And by learning what you're going to be going through, this can really help you. We all know that when we reach a job or anything that has layers to it and phases to it, it really helps when you know what you're going to be going through.
Okay, so just one last question. You're talking about the different levels. When you go back to those circles with the arrows, and the way that you were describing it, it's as if go back to the one.
Phase one.
Phase one. Okay, then to two, and then to three. You're describing like a bubble. You're just trying to have a burst in this tension with all this bubble, because it's contradiction after contradiction. Like from level one, it's all actually it's nothing, I guess. And then level two, let's be happy and altruistic to everybody with this thing called bestowal.
Right.
And level three is a contradiction of the previous one, and it's just as if it's like a bursting bubble ready to...
Right, it's intensity, it's conflict, it builds tension. It's also called the darkness phase, right? That's where you feel the most tension. But the idea, the goal of this tension is to bring you to phase 4. What phase 4 does, right, it has an intense desire for internal power, and it understands that the clothing is a result, not the action. So while with phase 3, it's having this conflict of, do I have to do this, do I have to do that? I have to do what the spiritual society tells me to do. It has that conflict. It's like the spiritual society tells me I need to just bestow. The phase 3 group tells me I only have to worry about internal power. And it has this conflict between those two. Phase 4, which is called spirit, is when you've resolved that conflict. And you understand that clothing is the result, not the action. I don't have to worry about the phase 2 spiritual society bestowal anymore. Because if my intense desire for internal power is so strong, the result of it will be an overflowing cup where I'll have that clothing. I'll be so intensely, it's like an atom bomb, right? So I'm so intensely growing, and then I explode and it goes boom. I cover the whole 4 phases, and it's called bringing those 4 phases into me, right? Because I'm clothing the entire world within me. And that's how you can see that there's no more dotted line around. It actually becomes my full vessel. The whole world, I buy it. It becomes mine for the taking. I swallow the entire reality within me. And that's phase 4.
Wow.
And then you can see this is, in one view, all the different phases. So you've got here, phase 1, humanity, you're unformed, and you just deal with external attraction. And the clothing is in that external attraction. You can then understand why phase 1 and phase 4 both deal with receiving. They both deal with attraction. The difference is that phase 1 is dealing with external attraction, and phase 4 is dealing with internal attraction. And this whole movement development is to get to that conclusion. And the reason you can't jump straight from phase 1 to phase 4, because you need that clothing in the middle. You need to want something which is outside your desire, because your desire is small. Your egoistic desire only cares about itself. How are you going to think of the self as being everything? So in order to reach that, you need to first do this opposition, where you're going from it's all about me to it's all about everybody else. Then you fail at that. And then you're like, oh, wait a second, why is this not working? Then phase 3 says to you, oh, it's actually, you have to work on internal power. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, I've got internal power, but I need to still worry about the world and about the world's correction. What if I just, correct myself? How will that correct the world? And you've got this conflict in you. And then the conclusion you reach in phase 4 is, wow, it is actually all about receiving. It's about receiving internal power. And by receiving the whole world in me, and not just caring about myself at the beginning, I'm caring about everything as myself. So in phase 2, it doesn't want to care about everything as itself. It wants to say, this is myself, and I have to care about everything which is outside myself. That's why it's altruism without self-benefit. Phase 4 says, everything's mine. So, the altruism is just going to be in it because I'm going to take care of myself. So when I'm going to take care of others, they're me. So I'm taking care of myself still.
And where's the breaking? How does this relate to the next step?
This is all before the barrier. The breaking of the vessels is much later on.
So this phase 4 culminates with that, that restriction that you call, it becomes a circle, but there's no breaking here?
No breaking. Before the barrier, there's no breaking. The breaking is after the second restriction, which is much after.
And at 4.4, we perceive this Ein Sof, the boundless light,
Exactly.
which is always here. It's always here at this time, but right now we just don't have the eyes to see it.
Exactly. That's the phase 4.4.4. That boundless light means you've clothed the entire world. That means it's boundless. There's a desire in the light. So the idea is you've bought the whole world, now it's all yours. And yeah, you judge it to a scale of merit, yes.
And the thing is, it's here right now, all around me, but I do not perceive it. That's beautiful. I hope to get there.
Yes, Moshe.
That guy, where's Malchut de Ein Sof in this picture? We're living in Malchut de Ein Sof right now.
Malchut de Ein Sof is you that you bought the entire world.
So at 4.4, I'm in Malchut de Ein Sof.
Yes.
And then after the barrier, I'm still in Malchut de Ein Sof?
Yes, but now you've gone above it. Remember, all the states continue going on. It's not that you pass the barrier and you're like, sayonara, friends.
No, right.
You have to still, be with them.
So up until 4.4, it's not Malchut de Ein Sof, not yet?
No, 4.4 is Malchut de Ein Sof. That's why Ba'al Salam talks about that, that they're prerequisite. Before you reach that 4.4, that's when you go through all the phases.
But technically, we're living in Malchut de Ein Sof, we're just not aware of it.
Yeah, you're not aware of it. So the idea is that at the beginning, a person just sees himself as another person in a world of people. He doesn't see himself as the center of the world, right? When we say to people, you're so egoistic, you think it's all about you, that is actually a correct assessment that should be actually made. It's all about you. And you should become the most egoistic person on earth. And the idea is for everyone to reach this full egoism, right? The idea is, not for just one person to reach it. The idea is for everyone to become so egoistic, so targeted, but have this system perception and the human perception at the same time. Yes, Moshe.
But also, I've been thinking about this a lot. When we say ego, because I've really been, it's a spiritual ego. It's a different type of ego. So it's like when we say we want to blow our ego, we want to become the creator, it's not the ego fulfilling. It's a different ego. It's
ego fulfilling.
Power.
It's fulfilling. Internal power is still filling. The reason why we call it internal power is because filling normally is something you just have and it's over, right? But power is something that keeps generating. And that's the difference between power and filling.
There's not really two egos. It's just one
spiritual power.
There's two egos. There's the physical ego and the spiritual ego.
Right.
There's the ego that wants to plateau, that wants relaxation. It says, okay, Zach, no problem, we'll do all this work, but then I get to relax, right? That is the ego of relaxation. You've got the other ego, which is the ego that actually wants to grow, wants to become powerful, wants to become the creator. That's the point in the heart. That's what gives you that desire to want to become the most powerful being on earth.
Right. Now, I had a question because I was trying to explain this to somebody. It's because when the point of the heart awakens, that's still a desire that's within the will to receive. That's still
exactly
within the ego. And
it's a will to receive within the will to receive.
Right. And we're trying to expand our point in the heart to cover up the whole will to receive. We don't lose the original will to receive. That doesn't get lost.
It gets deactivated when you pass the barrier.
Oh, it gets deactivated.
Yeah, that's why we say that we kill the ego. The problem is that people don't know that it's talking about two egos. The point in the heart is also an ego.
Okay.
Spiritual ego. It's the only ego that the creator actually created was this phase 4 ego that wants to be equal to him.
There's two egos. It's important to distinguish that, because if you're if you're working on this path and you're trying to expand your ego, it's unclear to somebody who doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to think, you know what, let me just like start desiring money, women, sex, all these other things. It's not that.
That's why it's ego for the power. You want to become the creator. You don't want to, become a rich person or become the most knowledgeable person on earth. You want to become the creator. That's the desire. But you want to receive that primacy. So that it is an ego. It is a will to receive. That's why phase 2 doesn't like phase 3 in that sense, because it sees it as totally opposite to him. It can't even think of the concept of how can you receive. You're meant to bestow. The creator bestows, I'm meant to bestow. The phase 3 says, yeah, but I can't bestow as a human. I can only bestow as the creator.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to become the creator before I can actually bestow.
Right.
And that's the calculation that happens. And the idea is, even if someone sees this ahead of time, it's not like you can jump phases. So someone in phase 2 can't just see this and say, oh, so I'll just start, working on internal power. You can't do that. You need to go through all the phases because you have to reach that maximum power. You have to it's like a kid. You have to try and you have to fail, and it's just a process you go through. And the idea is by showing this process, it's much easier to handle when you're going through it.
Mm.
Zachary, this is the only way that I can corporally relate what I feel that you're saying, in sense if you're describing a very beautiful way of having a baby, this new birth of this new reality.
Yes.
And you're describing it, as if you want us to use this ego and throwing us to the left, and you're forgetting, or maybe, not describing the labor pains that are going to come afterwards. Oh, well, yes.
I don't think I've ever said that this path is easy. I've never, ever said that this path is easy. If anything, I've said this path is hard. It's difficult, and that's precisely why you need to know that.
Well, it's not that you're saying it's easy or hard. It's just very appealing that the way it's described is, oh, yes, I do actually feel, let's do this, but there's labor pains that are going to be overcome. And so basically, it's okay. My question is...
It's meant to be appealing. It's like when you want a baby. It's appealing to have a baby. You're still going to go through pains. Yes.
And what strength do you recommend during those stages where you know that those labor pains are going to come, instead of just taking an epidural?
Well, you have to invest in the environment. That's precisely why we want to see these phases ahead of time, to know how we need to invest in the environment accordingly. So the idea is that if you're going to go through these intense pains, you need support not only from humanity, not only from the spiritual society, but also from the group, right? So the idea is showing these phases is to show you that you need to do a lot of work, but at least you can see what has to be done. So the idea is that you could go through this technically alone, but it would just be so unbearable that most of the chances you would plateau on the way, because your ego would say, no, this is too hard, forget it, let's stop here. And it might get to a point where it will basically even hide that from you. It'll take away that choice from you and basically say to you, no, this system concepts, it's nonsense, it doesn't make any sense, it's useless. I won't even contact Zakai for clarification. He's just talking, nonsense. And then you just leave. And that's fine. The idea is, if you want to avoid that, you have to actually deal with the things, and you have to ask and clarify and deal with the concepts that bother you, and go through that labor with support. Just like if you want an epidural, that means you have to be in a hospital. That's support. Think of someone who thinks, oh, I don't need the hospital. I can just do this at home without anybody's help. You're able to go through it, but it's going to be extremely painful. And the idea is to reduce that pain by having the environment to get you out of it as quickly as possible. It's not because of the disparity of form. It's darkness. Phase 3 is the hardest. It's the hardest to go through, emotionally, I would say. Phase 4 has a different difficulty. So phase 3's difficulty, the darkness, is that you feel that burning. That's why it's called burning. Because you feel that internal burning of that you want to become the creator, but you feel it so far. It's a whole phase away. And you're burning. You want to reach there. And the hardest is phase 3.3, where you're just burning and burning. So you're double burning, where you're just like, I feel that I can't be the creator, but I really want to. And it destroys you. And that's why it's so important to have, a friend and have a group to support you out of those deep descents. Remember, the idea is that the higher you have an ascent, the higher you have a descent. But the environment, the support will be able to help you handle that descent accordingly. Phase 4 has an opposite problem. Phase 4, its problem is it doesn't have those deep emotional descents anymore. And then it has to convince itself how am I going to become the creator if I can't advance out of pain? So in phase 4, you have to start learning how to advance out of pleasure. When phase 3, you're basically mostly advancing out of pain.
Can you clarify something for me? And it's just a judgment, but like, I don't understand when people say, well, you can't ask for it all, you know, like after the different phases, like, why can't I have it all? And then I can bestow even more.
Exactly. That's what phase 3 is getting to the conclusion, that it wants it all. Phase 2 doesn't want that conclusion. Phase 2 doesn't want it all. Phase 2 wants to stay small and bestow to the society. That's why it's all about the society. Because if I want to get out of myself, I have to praise something outside of myself. What's outside of myself? The society. The problem is that phase 2 also becomes a self, and then it can't support itself either. And that's why it can't, keep people inside, and it's not very good with communication inside. It's like a family, right? It's got bad communication, can't get things done, and it's just, it's phase 2 is a phase that's designed to fail, right? Just like phase 3 is a phase that's designed to fail. Every phase is designed to fail, right? So only the failures actually advance. And the people which are successful in a phase plateau in it. Right? We can see many people in phase 2, they're actually very happy. They're very successful in phase 2, and that's totally fine for them to be successful in it. The people that fail, they come to phase 3. They come to system concepts.
Thanks.
I think in the phase 2 too, it's the camaraderie. People are enjoying that a lot. So that's actually a reception. It's an external filling, wouldn't it be?
Well, they're enjoying that they're enjoying that they're not enjoying. They're enjoying that they're clothing, that they're dealing with things outside of themselves. They get immense enjoyment from that, but they're not actually getting anything in their own vessel. If you ask them what you actually have, they have nothing. Right? If you're bestowing to the world Kli, what do you have? Do you have anything? Has your finance improved? Has your relationship with your wife improved? Has your relationship with your boss improved? Anything improved in your life? No.
But
I'm bestowing to the world Kli. I feel so great.
No, you want to succeed. You want to go. The Creator wants us to have it all, and that's why I was like, when I was in phase 2, and I don't know where I am right now, but I'm just saying it was like I felt weird talking about this, like having it all, to give it to other people, give it away. That's how I always thought. If you have it, give it away.
Yeah, but you first have to get it all. That's the problem. The problem is that's what phase 2 does. Phase 2 wants to give away already what it has in phase 1. So phase 1 wants to use what it had in humanity and give it away in phase 2. It's like, no, you have to become everything. Everything has to become yours before you can give away. And what are you giving away? That is not to give away money. That's why it's called external clothing. Phase 2 wants to give away money or give away support or, do things, help the neighbors and stuff. That's what phase 2 wants to do. Phase 3 doesn't want to do that. Phase 3 wants to bestow concepts. It wants to clean concepts, share concepts. That's what it cares about. We're not going to give each other money. I don't know your bank accounts, and I don't need to. It's about sharing concepts, which only humans deal with. So even phase 2, you've got animals that support each other. All right, so the Holy Ari. Now we're actually reaching the Talmud Sefirot itself. Reason for passing the barrier. The reason for creation was the revelation of his names and appellations. Number 2, when it rose upon his simple ratzon, desire, to create the olamot, worlds, and emanate the netzalim, emanated, to bring the perfection of his deeds, his names and appellations to light, which was the reason of the creation of the olamot, worlds. So the reason why you need to cross the barrier is because there's only so much you can see as a human, and you want to go to the system perspective, the system level, to be able to actually see the names and appellations of the light, which means the names and appellations in your clothing that you've done in the world. So you've clothed the entire world, you've bought the entire world, your desire is now the size of the world. Now what? Well, now you've got to start seeing what you bought. Just like when you buy a product, you don't know what's inside it until you actually buy it, you take it home, and then you start fiddling around with it to start seeing what it's got inside of it. So the same thing, you bought the entire world, then you pass the barrier, and now you're starting to let bits of the world sip into you as the creator, looking down on creation and allowing it to go to you and say, okay, let's see what we got here. Let's see this discernment. Let's see that. And so on. The Balasam commentary. Simple desire. when it rose upon his simple ratzon desire. Number 30. We need not wonder how there is a ratzon desire in Ein Sof boundless, which is higher than any notion, to which we can say rose upon its simple ratzon desire. You should comprehend what has been said above, that in every netzal emanated, there is by necessity a will to receive the shefa abundance from the matzil emanator. However, in Ein Sof boundless, it is a simple ratzon desire, because he is one and his name is one. The aura light in Ein Sof boundless is called he, and the will to receive is called his name, and they are a simple unity without any form of separation. However, we should not resemble the unity and separation discussed here with corporeal unity and separation that are distinguished by motion, nearness, and distance. This is because the spiritual essence does not take up any space. So we're saying here that because it's a simple desire, what it means is because you reach this phase 4, and the result of your desire, of your attraction, is that clothing, right? That means that your clothing is equal to your desire. So the clothing is he, right? And the desire is his name, and they become one. The clothing is equal to the desire.
I understand now. So basically, to get that clothing, to get that equality, what we care about is just build that internal power, and then we get that equality, right?
Exactly, and the result of it, right? So that's why there's no form of separation there between the internal power and the clothing. I can't see the chat, so if you want to ask, you just ask.
Well, can you say that it's it's not a linear relationship? It's not like, oh, as I build my internal power, as a result of that, I have more clothing. Is that how, is it like a linear kind of relationship?
It's like overflowing the cup. When you pour into the cup, it's going to overflow, but it's a result of filling the cup. It's not like you're planning on overflowing. It's not like you're going like this. You're filling only the cup. Your action is to fill the cup. The result is that it overflows and covers the entire surface.
So like this is what we were yearning all along. And that's why we started, at the point in the heart and, moving forward. And suddenly you start tasting something and you want more.
Exactly.
And you want more. And yeah.
Exactly. And you can see these answers are not to just make you sort of feel happy and stop. These answers are to propel you forward. To say, oh, so you mean I'm actually going in the right direction. And to show you
they are.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's better not to understand, and that's that lack, that desire. The whole thing is built on desire and lack.
Yeah, but it is to have the desire, even though you have the knowledge. If you say to yourself, if I have the knowledge and my desire will be small, that means that your desire won't reach the size anyway. So the idea is that you need to build your desire on top of this knowledge. And not say, oh, the knowledge reduces my desire. That means that you're not building the right desire, or you're not increasing it correctly. The idea for this knowledge is to actually increase your desire every time, not to make you want to relax. It's meant to make you want to move forward, but move forward correctly. And invest in the right places.
Yeah. It increases discernment.
It's kind of funny because I find I get great joy from the knowledge, not in the knowing of it, but in the light that I find within it and all the subtleties.
That's fine. But the idea is that you want that to propel you even more forward. It's like learning about, let's say you're going to go to an event, right? And you read about the event and you read about the movie. Let's say you're going to go to see a movie and you watch the trailer 5 times and you prepare for it and you learn about the synopsis of it. And does that reduce your enjoyment of the movie or increase it? If it increases it, then you'll probably want to invest more. Like the more you invest before, that's why Rav always talks about that it's all about preparation. That the preparation of a Congress is much more important than the Congress itself. It's like, well, what? I should just do the preparation and not go to the Congress? No, of course you should go to the Congress. But the preparation that you do before will decide how much you enjoy the Congress. So the idea is the preparation of the desire will decide how much you enjoy the desire afterwards when you get it.
Well, it's because you're investing more into it, and that's really what it is,
You're making it more powerful because you're bringing your internal perceptions, your questions with you, your preparation with you to build it higher. Sometimes you could, delve into something that another friend wouldn't go to that place.
Exactly.
And you're bringing it up.
You can see how, like, I could just jump directly into the Talmud of Sefirot and no one would have a clue what it's talking about. When I gave that little preparation, then you suddenly look at this and you're looking at this from a totally different perspective. So the words are the same, but the way you interpret them are totally different.
And reminding us of the three rules has been invaluable to me too. And I know that goes for all the Kabbalistic texts, but those three rules, so I'm really getting that ingrained in me.
Exactly. It's very important to do so about everything you read. Here I bring it directly for Talmud and Sefirot, but it applies for everything. And you can see how, it takes us time to go through those phases of, at the beginning we think it's all about external. Like, look, it talked about a person. Look, the Zohar talked about a donkey. He was walking with a physical donkey. Well, why would it be anything different? And it's like, oh, it's an internal donkey. I don't know what that means, but okay. And then you've got the second thing, it's, but it's talking about the past. So when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did this, and that, or when Moshe Rabbeinu did this, or when Avram Avinu did that, it's like, oh, it's talking about what happened 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It's like, well, no, the states, they're talking about states that go through, so you're meant to read it. Even if there was a person that was named Moshe, or there was a person named Avram, who cares? What matters is you're going to go through these states in your future, and you're not reading about the past. It's not history. Kabbalah is not meant to be a history lesson. It's meant to be, your advancement, your path, your future.
Like it evokes you. Like, what does it evoke in you when you read it? You know what I mean? Inside. What does it wake up?
Right, but it's meant to awaken you for the future, not awaken you for the past. You're not meant to feel like, oh, wow, Moshe Rabbeinu was such a nice guy, such a great guy. Like, that's not the response you're meant to do. You're meant to be like, I'm waiting to be Moshe. I'm waiting to be Avram. I'm waiting to reach those states. I want to become King David. That's what it should make you want to be. And not just be like, oh, isn't it nice that King David was such a great king? So it's moving it from the past to the future. And this brings them the third rule, don't think it's talking about other people. It's not. It's talking about you. And every person should read this as it's talking about themselves. It's talking about nobody else. If everybody died in the world, could you still learn TES? And yes, you could.
And it's about our future state.
Exactly. Change of form. Having said that, you should know that separation in spirituality occurs only by means of shinoi tzura, change of form. Thus, if one spiritual thing acquires an additional tzura form that is unlike its current tzura form, it stops being one and becomes two separate entities. The distance from each other is measured by the oppositeness of their forms. Just as corporeal entities connect and separate through proximity and remoteness, so spiritual entities connect and separate according to the difference and equivalence of form. The shinui tzura, change of form, separates them from one another, and the ishtavut tzura, equivalence of form, brings them together. Remember that, for it is key element. Remember that, for it is the key element to this wisdom. Now you'll understand the meaning of the aforementioned words, he is one and his name is one, and the simple unity we are so meticulous about in Ein Sof boundless. Indeed, this unity is of the wonders of his almightiness. So, in physicality, right, changes are by a change of, time, space, and motion. And in spirituality, it's about change of form. So the idea is you can see in phase 3, it's dealing with those, the clothing and the reception as two different forms, you could say. But then in phase 4, they become one. They become one form because one is the result of the other. Therefore, they're not separate. You're not investing energy into two different directions. You're investing energy in one direction for one goal, and that's that simple unity. So he is one is the clothing of the world, and his name is one is the desire to own your reality.
Increasing the desire for the goal, that's considered preparation for the Congress, so that you're just fueling that desire?
Two people can go to the same Congress and have two different uses for the Congress. So phase 2 will go to a Congress, the Congress as an end. The Congress is to do connection between people and increase that unity between us. That's what phase 2 goes to a Congress for. The discernments it's going to collect out that Congress are going to be very, very small for their spiritual growth. If you go to a Congress as a phase 3, that means you're going to the Congress to collect discernments of how you're going to become the creator. You're still doing exactly the same physical actions that someone in phase 2 is going to a Congress, but you'll see a Congress as totally different. You'll experience it it'll be like two different Congresses.
You can steal everybody's souls.
so you can't steal thoughts until you pass the second restriction, but you can still you can collect tons of discernments about the lessons of the Rav, of the friends, of what they answer in the workshops. Just feeling that intensity, you can gain a lot of discernments.
Yeah, but the preparation, though, to increase that intensity of desire, that's what is preparation. That's what's called preparation for Congress.
So, for example,
finding ways to develop that desire.
The preparation of the Congress is to understand what is the Congress, well, like what is its goal, like sort of like when I went to the Zohar Congress, for example, in 2014, which was my first actually Congress, I didn't know about the goal then. I didn't know that the goal was to become the creator. So I was in the Congress and I was acting the Congress, but I wasn't collecting discernments or anything. I was just being like everybody else being in the Congress. I even brought my mother there. And it was great. I really enjoyed myself, but I wasn't collecting discernments how to become the creator. I mean, more about the one that you just had, the Congress of, or was it?
The last one.
Yeah, that one.
That was the first Congress for me that I was actually with the goal of the discernments. And I was talking to them before about my states, that for me it was a very, very different Congress for me, because I was so aware of my states and what was going on. And like for me, Friday was a major ascent for me, which is usually the beginning of the Congress. It's nobody's even really awake. And I was flying ridiculously high on Friday. And then Saturday, I felt I crashed so hard. And Saturday for everybody else was like the peak. And I was like at the low, complete low. So everything was like opposite for me. Like it was so weird. Like it was very different. And I know we spoke during the Congress and a lot. I mean, I obviously just major discernments. Everything is just, it's just different. Everything is different now. Even now, like everywhere I go when I do workshops, it's like I'm tuning into this person. Like this is the creator speaking through him. That's me talking to myself, and I'm trying to like make sense of all of it. It's just different. Everything's different now. It's hard to explain. You just kind of experience. You have to explain. Experience it for yourself.
But how did you prepare for that Congress, though?
It's really just like, I mean, preparing is just like anybody else. It's just like reading, doing workshops, doing things with the group. But all along, I'm doing it with a greater goal, right? Like, it's just trying to intensify your desire as much as you can. And then when you get to Congress, it's like a release almost. And you actually go through many, many states that way, I think, as well. I think the goal really in anything is you need to find ways to increase your desire. I mean, that's the secret. Like, the more you can increase your desire, because there's no light without it. There's no light without a kli. So it's like, all right, so then all I need is the desire. That's on me. Like, how can I increase my desire? I think that's the half shekel right there,
Exactly. I think we'll continue.
Boshi, thank you for sharing. That was excellent, buddy.
Yeah.
That should be shared with all your friends.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And there's nothing that you should be ashamed of in any shape, form, or manner. That was excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
I agree. Totally agree. Opposition. We have witnessed the difference between the Matzil emanator and the Netzal emanated that was formed by Tzurah form of that will to receive that exists in the Netzal emanated and not in the Matzil emanator. Because of that Shinui Tzurah change of form, the Netzal emanated became separated from the Matzil emanator and acquired its own separate name, meaning Netzal emanated and not Matzil emanator. The above explanation might mislead us into thinking that Or Ein Sof boundless light called He is not entirely adherent with Ein Sof boundless called his name, meaning the will to receive the Or light and the Shefa abundance called He. That is because the Or Elyon upper light that extends from his Atzmut essence, called He, has but one attribute to bestow, and none of the Tzurah form of the will to receive. So you've got an interplay here between the emanator and the emanated. The emanator is always the previous degree. So you can say that phase 2 is the emanator of phase 3. Phase 3 is the emanator of phase 4. Right? It's the cause and consequence of each of the phases. And the idea is to understand that the clothing and the will to receive are equal. But because the result is that bestowing, that clothing the entire world, that's why it's called Or Ein Sof. The idea that they're both equal because one is the result of the other. They've actually got equality in that. Let's continue. Unity. However, Ein Sof boundless, called his name, which does have a will to receive, is therefore different from the Or Elyon upper light, which has no will to receive whatsoever, as has been explained. And we know that Shinoi Tzura, change of form, separates. However, the Midrash and the Rav, the Holy Ari, tell us that it's not so. Instead, he is one and his name one, in simple unity. It means that there is no difference between them. Although there is necessarily a difference of form between he and his name, it is nevertheless completely inactive there. We do not understand it, but it is undoubtedly so. It is said about that there is no perception or thought in Ein Sof boundless whatsoever, since this matter is above our mind, which will be discussed further in the next item. You can see how it does help to bring it closer to the mind when you understand that you've got the intense will to receive to become the creator. You've got the result, which is the clothing of the entire world, that bestowal, and that is how they're actually, the will to receive is inactive there because it actually becomes that will to bestow, and that's how you actually pass the barrier. Any questions?
Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
Okay. So we've got the will to receive. What does the will to receive want to do? It doesn't want to just have filling, right? Like phase one. It wants to become the creator, right? What is the creator? The creator is the quality of bestowal. So you've got a will to receive that wants to become the will to bestow, right? Because the will to receive wants to become the will to bestow, and the result of that reception is actually that clothing of the entire world, which is the light. The light is called the clothing of the entire world. The vessel is called the will to receive that light to clothe. So because you're wanting another thing, that means that there's no difference between them. And even though there's a difference of form, we could say, look, this is the clothing, this is the action. But because they're intertwined to each other, because they want each other, therefore they're one.
Like a marriage. Will to receive and will to bestow, they both want with the same, the same, they have the same.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a marriage. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Man and woman.
Yes. So you can see how it gives you a sort of a taste of what this is talking about. It's not talking about that you're endlessly filled with delight or anything like that. Rather, it's talking about your ability to clothe your entire reality, and you reach that clothing by intensively desiring. And that's the idea when they said that there's no light without the vessel. What does it mean there's no light without the vessel? It means you can't clothe if you don't have a vessel. It means you can't clothe something outside of your area of desire. You can't really care about something that you don't have a desire for. And that's what phase 4 does. Phase 4 understands that. And what it does is it intensely desires internally, and it just overflows externally. And sort of the whole world is mine. And then the whole world you're swallowing into itself. So you could say that the phase 1 only deals with itself. Phase 2 wants to deal with the whole world. Phase 3 has a conflict between wanting internally and externally. And then phase 4 says, wait a second, but what if I take the whole world and actually think it's me? That means I'm taking the whole world and bringing it into me, right? Not physically, right? There's no shaking of things around you. It's clothing, right? It's like when I clothe my car, can you look at anything in my car to say that it's mine? Can you look in the atoms of the car and say, oh, I see this car belongs to Zach Hamilton. It's like, how did you know? I gave it to 3 different people. It's like, look, I see in the atoms, it says Zach Hamilton. It's like, there's nothing in the atoms that can tell you about clothing. If you're in the restaurant and you're looking at the walls, right, of the restaurant, is there anything in the wall that says, oh, Zach Hamilton is in that wall? No. In the desire, if I eat the food, yes, the food goes inside me. It's part of me, right? Probably if you looked in the feces of the food, you could find that it was mine, right? There's probably an imprint there. But in the clothing, there's no imprint. So the idea is that if I clothe the entire world, no one knows but me.
I have to ask you something, and maybe I'm collapsing 2 things that we're learning. Like at the beginning, they had the phases where, the light came in, and then, the different phases with the light. like the light coming into us, and then something happens, they say. Remember with the 2 arrows? Anybody? Do you know what I'm saying? You know those phases of light?
Yeah, the 4 phases of direct light.
Okay. So, and then like at phase 3, I think it is, something happens where one arrow's one way, one arrow's the other way, like it doesn't want to take anymore, wants to give. Can we relate what you're saying now to these 4 phases?
That is exactly what we're going through. That's exactly what we're going through. We're going through these 4 phases. So you've got, you know, I'll go back to it because this is actually the end of it. Yeah. So I'll go over those 4 things and you'll see it. It's exactly talking about that.
Yeah.
So you've got phase 1 wants to receive, right? So it's an arrow going down.
Mm-hmm.
Phase 2 wants to bestow, so it's an arrow going up. Phase 3 wants to internal attraction, so it's receiving. And it's got external clothing, which is bestowal, which is an arrow going up. And then phase 4 has a double arrow or bold arrow going in, because it's intense internal attraction. Right?
Thank you.
That's exactly what we're doing. We're taking all these things that we've been learning all these years, and we've been learning them about something that happened before time, even though it's above time, but we still think it's before time. And relating it to, it's not talking about before time. It's talking about things we're going through. That's why it's above time. Above time means that every person goes through it in his own time. So when we're talking about the states are above time, but when you experience them, they're going to be in time. You're going to be able to say, I moved from 3.2 to 3.3 from February to March, right? But somebody else might be going through 3.2 to 3.3 between, you know, the first week of December and the second week of December. So the states themselves are above time. Each person can experience them in his time. It's like saying that, you know, see, even degrees, for example, they're fixed in time, right? So you have to go through 4 years of a degree to have a degree. But there are some degrees, for example, that you can just do on your own time, right? You learn as fast as you want or as slow as you want, and you'll get the degree. So you could say that is spiritual time, because we're not deciding how long it will take you. You decide how long you want to go through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because when they were showing those diagrams, and I kept asking questions like, so what happened there with the arrow, the 2 arrows? Why is it, you know, they go, something happened in phase 3. I don't know if anybody remembers how they describe it. And then something happens when the arrow goes one way, and you know, in Bina, I think it was. That's
reception and bestowal.
Exactly.
Right.
So you've got the reception is internal attraction, and bestowal is external clothing.
If they would have explained it that way, I wouldn't. But if you give me an answer like, well, something happened, I kept writing, what happened? What happened?
Well, the thing is, they can't tell you what's happened because they're relating it. They're phase 2, so they're relating it as something past. They're teaching the way all these articles and tasks and all this stuff were taught until now. They were taught impossible. They were taught as things that happened in the past. There was this creature that the creator created, and things happened to it. So if you ask any questions above what the learning material provides, they don't know. They weren't there. How can they give you an answer? The reason I can give you answers is because I'm not talking about, I don't know what happened then. I don't really care. What I care about is things you can go through. So if I've gone through a phase, I can tell you, look, this is what I went through. And other people who've gone through that phase as well can tell you that they went through the exact same thing. But they went through it at different times, right? So I might have went through something when I'm 31. Somebody else might have went through it when they're 26. And somebody else would have went through it when they're 51. So the physical age is irrelevant. But still the people that go through it, they're aware of it, and they see the struggle between them in that darkness, in that phase 3. And see, people who have reached that phase 4 no longer have that struggle. That's why it's not darkness anymore. It's spirit. You're full of spirit. You're targeted. You know where you're going. So
can I ask a question about phase 4?
I know more of what happened before. It's I know what's happening now, and that's how I'm relating to it. And that's why you'll get the different answers. They're relating it as something that happened in the past. So the most they can give you is what is written in the books and nothing more. They can make me think of stuff, but they can't actually give you any hold on it. Because we're relating it here as things we actually go through. I know what I went through, so I can talk to you about it.
I have a question about phase 4. Is phase 4, is that where we have internalized that everyone in the world is me? Is that a state I would be in?
Exactly, but it's the result. So it's the end of phase 4. So the end of phase 4 is when you understand the whole world is you, and everyone's an expression of you.
Wow.
And this has never been, as far as my knowledge, this has never been taught in this kind of manner. And when I'm going over the material, I'm constantly relating it to myself and states I've gone through.
Especially in English.
Yeah, it's never been.
It might have been discussed in Hebrew.
But it hasn't. But I don't think it's done in Hebrew either.
In very small groups, privately.
And it's not about the knowledge. So even if I share with you states, it doesn't mean that you, by knowing that knowledge, reach that state either.
But yeah, we still need the knowledge of the books and everything as a foundation to build upon.
Exactly. We're using a book here. It's called Talmud Sefirot, which was written by the student of the Ari, which is Rav Chaim Vital, which learned this information from the Ari. And then you've got Bala Sulam's commentary on it, right? And then sort of, the little switch that I'm adding on.
Yeah.
And I see one addition. I seen one edition where they said the purpose of this crossing the barrier is that it reveals his deeds, names, and appellations.
Which means that you reveal the names and appellations of the light you've bought, of the world, of the reality you bought.
Mm-hmm.
That's the deeds.
Exactly.
When you're reading the material, you're internalizing it.
Yes. Well, if you've gone through it, you can internalize it much easier.
Jenny, I think I want to answer Jenny's question. Is like, how do I prepare? Well, I got to tell you, when I started reading everything now, like Bala Salam and Rabash and the TES and Zohar and everything, like it's talking about me, like even the 4 phases of direct life. I mean, it's exciting. It's just like really exciting, and it's like you're really focused and you want to feel it, you want to experience it. If that doesn't create desire, I don't know what does. You know what I mean? It's not like a history lesson anymore. It's like, I want to know, I want to feel this, I want to know this. And you just grow. You just feel that desire,
As you're retraining yourself, what you're reading is you, because you're the only one that's internalizing what you're reading.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm getting it. It just, the desire for all of this to stick and stay and be so much a part of me that there's not a question. I pick up the binder. I've printed off all these articles and reprinted a couple. And it's like this hunger. And I'm guessing that I just keep feeding it. I guess just keep feeding it. So
and you're feeding it through reception.
And that's okay. That's a good thing. It's for the goal. It's right.
Well, it's like, think of it like this way. The thing with phase 2, the reason why it fails miserably is because, think of it as Bala Salam also talks about this, that was the failure of Russia, right? Why did Russia really fail? Well, because they didn't have the goal. So what if they didn't have the goal? Like, the creators, envies, like, hey, you didn't include me in this. That's it. Oh, you're not including me in the party. I'm vengeful. That's it. You're out. It's like, no, there's no outside creator having this conversation, right? So the reason why they failed is because you can't bestow, you can't clothe what you don't have. You can only clothe in your desire. Right? That's what we said in phase 1. So the laws stay the same. The thing is that phase 2 tries to bestow, right? And that's why it says it tries to bestow, but it has nothing to bestow, because at the end of the day, it realizes that it's just a will to receive, right? That's what it says in TES. And we'll be going over that, I don't know if it will be this time or next, or this coming time, or the one after. It depends if we'll repeat this or not. We'll probably go over it again next week. But it's a conclusion. It's a process, right? It's a thought process that you go through, and it's a feeling process as well. It's not just thinking like, oh, so I know now what phase 4, and I'm in phase 2, so I can just skip. It's like, no, you have to go through it, and you can't skip the phases. And knowing the future phases won't help you. It's like, if you knew about the end of correction, would that help you actually reach it right now? No, there's so many levels you have to go between. It's like a kid knowing about being an adult. He's like, now I know about being an adult, I can skip adolescence. It's like, good luck. You won't be able to skip it. You might be able to go through it easier if you know the things you're going to go through. If a kid knows that he's going to go through immense changes, psychologically and with all the different, what's the word I'm looking for? The processes that happen inside a person when he's going through adolescence. If he was aware of that, it would be much easier for him. If he suddenly gets to a point where he hates his father, if he understands the reason he hates his father is not because his father is actually bad, but rather because he's going through these changes and his need to be independent, then it'll be much easier for him to not run away from home. Right? So the idea is it's not that he won't go through them emotionally, that he'll able to handle them. He'll able to handle his emotions much easier when he's going through those stages. When you know you're in phase of 3 and you're in darkness and you're feeling this immense hate towards the society and immense hate towards your friends, if you know that it's part of the process, it'll be much easier for you to handle it and just help, go to a closest friend and help you get through it than leaving and saying, that's it, sayonara, I'm out. It's like, if you know the process, it's much easier to handle it when you're going through it.
Yeah, and this makes hindsight 2020. Well, clarity, understanding what kinds of things you were experiencing in the past, and pick yourself up now, brush yourself off, and go forward. Now, I guess that's how I feel.
I guess you dust yourself off and try again. The advantage of, the only difference between people is who's gone through phases before and after. That's the only difference. And it should only be the only difference. And the idea, that's why we can actually share these states with each other, precisely because we go through the same thing, right? It's like, it'd be like a kid saying, shh, don't tell me that you're an adult. Because, if you tell me about what's being an adult, I'll lose all the fun. And the funny thing is that phase 2, which wants pleasure, right? It wants pleasure through that indirection, right? So it wants to do external clothing in order to get pleasure at the end, right? It still wants to have pleasure. He wants the whole world to get better. Why? Because for him to get better. He hides it from himself, but he still wants his life to get better. And he does it through externally. He wants pleasure. He doesn't want power. So the last thing he wants is for somebody else to tell him what he's going to have to go through. Because he doesn't want to have to go through anything. He wants just the end of correction to come tomorrow. And for him, he actually thinks it can happen. A magical light called the light that reforms will come, and tomorrow we'll all reach end of correction. And the world will be a beautiful place. We'll all be relaxing and enjoying each other. There'll be no more wars. There'll be no more fights. The world will be a wonderful place. That's what phase 2 imagines. That's the peace that phase 2 imagines. Phase 3 starts to understand that's a terrible world to be in. That's a lifeless world to be in. And that the idea is to actually reach a world where we're all powerful beings, not relaxed beings and doing nothing beings.
But a person does get to the point where I'm guessing that they've done all that they can, and they're basically throwing up their hands and say, I've done everything, and it's still this. And so I guess if you don't want me, then you don't want me. And even though my heart says I can't stop, you still feel like you can't. You just have totally lost your way.
But that's what you need to reach. Rav always talks about how we have to reach that state. Reaching that state pushes you to phase 3. I think we'll end here and go to the after party.